So in this video we're going to look at Act 5, Scene 5 of Macbeth in some detail, looking at three sections of the scene that could potentially be used as extracts in a GCSE question, but also considering its bigger and broader significance. This is a scene in which Lady Macbeth kills herself, although of course we don't see that on stage, and more importantly in some ways, because kind of her death has been coming for a while, it is Macbeth's response, and particularly the reflection that he has afterwards. So it basically works by beginning with, again, another one that often begins these scenes, actually, Macbeth proclaiming his strength and his defiance at the beginning. Several scenes begin that way. In this case, he proclaims they'll have to lay siege to his castle, and it's so strong that they'll just end up dying. No siege is going to work. Okay? But then he's interrupted by the cry of women, as it's said, which leads him to ponder how long it's been since he felt fear, which is interesting considering how dominant that was earlier in the play. Then the news is brought of Lady Macbeth's death. At first he reacts casually, but then he ponders on the pointlessness of life in the very famous Tomorrow speech. And it ends with the messenger bringing shocking news to him that Birnam Wood appears to be marching against the castle, as the witches said it would. Now, it's probably important to notice that this is the time when he hears about Birnam Wood. And remember, this is the first of the prophecies that's disproved to him. Okay, the fact that it comes after Lady Macbeth's death, that it comes after him considering the pointlessness of life, probably has a sense of significance into it. Shakespeare's structure is always very, very important, very significant. And this is followed immediately by the sending out of Macduff, as well as young Seward, for the first attack, which is going to, of course, bring about the end of the second prophecy. So it's kind of carefully put together, and I'd notice the placing of that. Now, in terms of the big issue, these are the four that I would say are most related to this situation. Macbeth, obviously, because of his reflection on life and his reaction to the news of things changing. The relationship between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, of course, because of the way that he is reflecting on her death. We could definitely bring in the supernatural because of the ideas of what's happening in Birnam Wood and his response about the witches there, and kingship in terms of the of him kind of reacting as a king here at the beginning, reflecting on his choices and maybe the fear that comes at the end. Look at the first key moment we could go for here. Now, despite the interesting bit of the castle, our castle will laugh a siege to scorn at the beginning, his confidence that comes out at the beginning, I would say that much more interesting is this section. And maybe because of that confidence. I mean, there's a lovely little line that people don't notice at the beginning of this scene when he says that were they not forced with those that should be ours, we might have met them therefore beard to beard and beat them backward home. Which is essentially saying if they didn't have numbers bolstered by the people who should be on our side, those thanes who've left, then I would happily face them rather than the siege. That idea of the strong soldier in there, he wants to go out and fight them. I love that phrase, beard to beard. But then he's interrupted. And this is now he begins with a very sensual reaction. Okay? It's interesting he goes for the sense of, I have forgot the taste of fear, what fear tastes like in the mouth. Not the feel of it, the taste of it. It's quite a bit more of a kind of visceral sensation, really, isn't it? The sense of the taste of fear in my mouth. It almost suggests that there's a sense of thrill to that fear, maybe, that it's something he lived off before. He follows it up by talking about his senses in the past would have called, and he would have been much more bothered by this. But again, the point is a sensual reaction, not necessarily an internal reaction. Now he takes that further by describing what would have happened had he done this. How his fell of hair would at a dismal treatise rouse and stir as life were in it. Now that may just seem like a nice poetic line, his hair taking a life of its own. But I'd say to you, think back in Act 1, Scene 3, when we get his first ponderings inside his head, his first asides, and he's talking about his reaction to being made Thane of Cawdor. He thinks very quickly of the idea of murder, and he comes to this idea of his hair being unfixed. Now, I think there's a deliberate link between the two of these here. He's kind of remembering a time when he would have had a reaction like that, as I said before, a visceral reaction like that. And again, I feel there's almost a sense of regret, almost nostalgia for that kind of a period. That even though fear may be something you'd think you wouldn't want, it seems like there's a sense of that's when he was normal. And to follow with the idea that he is supped full with horrors, and again that sensual idea of eating up horrors so much that he no longer tastes fears, a thing like that, is once again an image that creates a sense of regret as far as I'm concerned. Horror has led to the dulling of fear. Too much horror has led to the dulling of fear. Now, I think you can make a great deal out of that extended use of sensual ideas in coming up here. So think about the idea of the connection of sensual imagery and fear. And then that balance, is he pleased or is he regretful that he doesn't feel fear anymore? Okay, now obviously a far more likely key moment to come up in this scene is this one, including the tomorrow speech. And if it does, there's a lot that can be said about it, but you need to feel very comfortable with the content of that speech. Now it starts at the beginning after the blunt pronouncement that she's dead, with what appears to be quite dismissive line. There's actually quite a bit of debate in Shakespeare scholars about whether she should have died hereafter means she should have died later, or she should have died at some point, or would have died at some point, so she's going to do it anyway. But whichever way, it does seem to lack the kind of emotion, the kind of love, the kind of devotion that we've seen in their relationship throughout. Yet the point is, it is juxtaposed straight away with this reflection on life, which suggests maybe it's less about his feelings for the Queen as much about his feelings about life in general at this point. Now, if we move into the tomorrow speech, the first part of it is very much about the nature of time. He creates this image of time creeping on, and particularly the future, just creeping on in what he describes as a petty pace, a slow and petty. Well, our modern perspective of it is the idea that petty means slightly pointless and unimportant and made too much importance of. And so he seems to be relegating time back into the background. It keeps creeping on and on and on just from day to day, and then time will stop. It's an incredibly bleak image that suggests there's no purpose in living further on. There's no purpose in time. And then he refers back to the past and dismisses that, all our yesterdays, as literally lighting fools on the way to dusty death. Lighting fools the way to dusty death. That's all it is. Now, when he's saying fools, I don't think he's just referring to people being idiots. I think he's just dismissing all people as foolish. Yeah? All ordinary people, we're all just fools. And all that we've done is we live our lives and do whatever, and all that the past has ever done is taken a bunch of people and turn them into dust. Now, if that isn't bleak enough, this succession of metaphors and similes, okay? Which basically explore life and his dismissive view of life at this point. We begin with the idea of the brief candle for life, an image that always reminds me, almost makes me think that Elton John potentially knew Macbeth, or Burning Talping. The idea of life as a candle that will burn not for too long. You know, it's a brief candle, but it will burn down gently. But of course, what's not said clearly in there, but it's just suggested to us, is the idea that candles can just be blown out really simply, really clearly, with very little effort. And it shows a sense of fragility. We are a light in the world, but eventually we will go out. The idea of life as a walking shadow is probably even bleaker. Remember, a shadow is an absence of light. And that alone is a pretty bleak way to see life on its own. But the sense of a shadow that is walking suggests that life is only a reflection of the actual thing. The thing that's creating a shadow is not our life. And therefore it suggests a lack of control, that we're just reflecting something that we think is us and our control. He moves on to an image related to one that he's used before, and other writers at the time used, about life as a play. He comes to this much more depth in As You Like It. But here, he's just going for the image of us being a poor player, a bad actor, not even a particularly good one, that struts and frets about for an hour. So that's why we're not a particularly good actor. All we do is make a lot of noise. It relates to what's coming in a minute, the next image. All we do is move about, make a lot of noise for an hour, and then we're not heard of anymore. And the very fact that that's being an actor on the stage, again, like the walking shadow, suggests this is not reality. There's nothing important to it. This is just a reflection of something else. And then finally, we have the tale told by an idiot. This sense of a storyteller who's not very bright. And the idea is that they will, like the poor player, make a lot of noise, make a lot of energy. They'll try and make it all sound very exciting, but there's no meaning behind it. And that is his conclusion about life. Strutting and fretting, sound and fury, a walking shadow, a poor player imitating, but there is no meaning behind it. We're just a candle that's going to burn down. So significant because at this point in the play, he's still going to carry on, and as we'll see in a minute, he'll come in the third key moment to this idea of fighting on to the death. But this is where he is in his head. This is his realization that all of this has been for nothing. Finally, in this key moment, is this idea then that he immediately reverts back to that slightly more dismissive man. In comes a messenger, and you've come to use your time. Come on, story quickly. So, despite all that philosophizing, he still is this harsh and aggressive king who just wants to get moving on. When we're thinking about this, think about that idea of his emotions about the death, and do ponder that idea of not just being dismissive, that maybe it's more a reflection on life. She was going to die anyway, there's no point anyway. Think about the link between that and the Tomorrow and Tomorrow speech, and think about why at this point he becomes so much more philosophical. There are other philosophical moments, as we know before this, but this is the most extended one. Now finally, again, far less likely to come up, but a speech of his when he has realised that Birnam Wood is coming to Dunsinane against what the witches. Now, it starts here at the beginning when he expresses his doubts. But you notice he puts it next to the idea of I pull in my resolution, I rein in my resolution. I can no longer be as confident as I once was, you know, because I am doubting that thing that has given me the confidence. Again, it's an example which suggests maybe that he realizes that all of his confidence, all of his will, which kind of potentially explains the philosophizing about the pointlessness of life, all of it comes from the prediction of the witches. And it's interesting he chooses to use the word equivocation here. His doubting is coming obviously at this point because of what's just happened. But it's interesting it's linked just after the Tomorrow and Tomorrow speech. As it carries on then, we return back to that more philosophical but definitely more depressed line that he begins to be aweary of the sun. An almost explicit wish for death, really. I've had enough of life. And that idea of being weary as well, I've had enough. It's not anything sudden. It's like a sense I'm tired of all of this, which is probably as good an example as any of how he seems to feel about what he's achieved in the play so far. But of course, very Macbeth in this last act, and elsewhere in other videos you'll find that one of my big arguments about Act 5 is that Macbeth is caught in this tension between becoming the soldier that he was at the beginning, being the king that he actually is and is very bad at, and that tension kind of resolves itself in the philosophizing and the understanding of the truth. And here is that soldier come back once again, that, okay, well, everything's gone, I'm had enough of Weir of the Sun, well, at least I'm going to die with armour on my back. And there is the true Macbeth, isn't it? There it is. He's a soldier. His greatest wish, a little bit like when Seward, in the end of this act, hearing about his son's death, says, well, as long as he had his hurts on the front, as long as he was killed in battle facing the enemy, then I'm happy he couldn't have had a better death. It's a little bit like that here. Macbeth can think of no better way to die than on the battlefield, and that maybe is a really good, along with the Ginter of the Sun, explanation of him. So, what have we got? Consider how he reacts to the hearing of the prophecy. Consider the feelings that he moves between here, the pulling and resolution, the becoming weary of the sun, and the dying with heart. So returning to those big ideas, consider this difference in behaviour, particularly since he became king, particularly since Act 3. The regression into being a soldier, or progression maybe even, and the more philosophical response, and the lack really of concern to do anything that will keep him in his position. We mentioned those ideas about his relationship with his wife coming through his response, his reaction to his wife's death. That's good to compare earlier to some of their more intimate moments. But do bear in mind that there really isn't another moment in the play when he discusses his wife without her being there. With the supernatural, we have to think about why is it at this point he begins to doubt the witches? Is it just purely because he has just heard about what's happening? Or is there some greater link to what's going on here, particularly the death of his wife? And is his realisation actually making him a better king at this point? Or is he worsening? He's already a pretty bad king to begin with.